Hi, and welcome to Section 5, React and Redux on the server. In this section, we're going to be running React and Redux on the server to make our application universal. We'll be building on what we've learned in the previous sections, looking at rendering React components on the server, handling the request on the server, generating the initial Redux state, hydrating on the client, and having the browser take over for client routing and page transitions. Each video will build on the other until we've built a fully universal JavaScript application. Now we move on to the first video of this section that introduces the ReactDomServer. In this video, we're going to review the data flow for server-side rendering in a React Redux application and use ReactDomServer class to render React components on the server. In Section 1, we defined universal JavaScript as JavaScript code that runs both on the backend web application server and a web browser. This has both operational as well as functional quality benefits. Functionally, this is helpful in rendering a single-page web application on the server for the initial page load, allowing the users to see a web page without having to wait for the entire JavaScript on the client side to finish loading. In the context of this video series, we made the decision to use React and Redux as our modern JavaScript libraries to build our application. This was motivated by the fact that React and Redux easily run on the server as well as in the browser. We'll be using React and Redux in node.js to pre-render the initial state of the application on the server. When the node server receives the request, it will fetch the initial data and render the required components into an HTML string, and then send it as a response to the client. From that point on, the client takes over the rendering duties, making AJAX requests to fetch additional data. We'll go through this implementation step by step, so let's start by discussing React on the server. The virtual DOM in React is central as to why React can be used for server-side rendering. Each React component is first rendered to the virtual DOM, which is an in-memory representation of the DOM. Instead of updating the real DOM, like it would on a browser, React can generate a string from the virtual DOM on the server. React provides two functions which can be used to render a component on the server side: RenderToString and RenderToStaticMarkup. For example, we will render to string a simple Hello World module. As you can see in this example, ReactDomServer.renderToString, unlike ReactDomRender, takes only one root element. There is no container argument as to where to render. Instead, this function returns a string. In the string output, React also adds additional attributes to the HTML. Data React ID is an auto-incrementing counter used by React to identify the DOM node in the browser environment. This is how React knows what DOM node to update when state and props change. Data React checksum on the root element is a checksum of the DOM that is created. This allows React to reuse the DOM from the server when rendering the same component on the client. It is very important that React components render the exact same markup on the server and on the client. If the data React checksum doesn't match, React will destroy the DOM supplied by the server and generate a new DOM node and attach them to the document. In this case, we'll lose much of the performance gain of server-side rendering. ReactDomServer.renderToStaticMarkup is the second render function we can use in the server. This is the same as RenderToString, except it doesn't include the additional React data attributes in the HTML. This should be used when we are not going to render the same React component on the client. In most cases, we'll want to use ReactDomServer.renderToString instead. This will allow React to reuse the DOM supplied from the server and to skip the process of generating the DOM nodes and attaching them to the document. Here's how the server code might look like. We import RenderToString function and call it with the app root component. We'll wrap the root component inside a provider component to make the Redux store available to all components in the component tree, as we saw in the previous section.